Have you ever noticed that the deeper you think, the more distant you feel from others? That the more you understand, the less people seem willing to listen? You're not imagining it. Society has always been wary of deep thinkers, not because they are wrong, but because they see what others refuse to acknowledge. History proves this time and time again. From Socrates to Nietzsche, from Galileo to Tesla, brilliant minds have been ridiculed, silenced, or ignored, not due to a lack of intelligence, but because their insights made people uncomfortable. Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers, once argued that intelligence itself is a curse, one that isolates those who see reality too clearly. But why does this happen? Why does society instinctively resist those who think differently? The answer lies deep within human psychology. Consider this. When you stand next to someone physically stronger, you don't necessarily feel weak. You admire their strength. When you meet someone wealthier, you may envy them, but you don't feel personally attacked. But encountering someone who is intellectually superior creates an entirely different reaction. Psychologists call this the mirror effect. A deep thinker doesn't just present new ideas, they unintentionally highlight the limitations of those around them. And people rarely forgive that. The mere presence of someone who thinks on a deeper level can make others feel inadequate, even if the deep thinker says nothing at all. But why? Why does intelligence, more than any other form of superiority, provoke discomfort? To understand this, we need to examine how our minds perceive different kinds of advantage. When someone is physically strong, we might see them as a protector or a leader. When someone is wealthy, we may admire their success or aspire to achieve the same. Strength, wealth, beauty, these are external traits. We recognize them, but they don't threaten our self-perception. Intelligence, however, is different. Unlike physical strength or material wealth, intelligence is closely tied to identity. We define ourselves by our thoughts, our beliefs, and our understanding of the world. So when we encounter someone who thinks on a deeper level, someone who questions what we take for granted, it can feel like a direct challenge to our sense of self. Instead of admiring intelligence, many people instinctively resist it, not because the deep thinker is arrogant or dismissive, but because their very presence forces others to confront their own limitations. This is why, throughout history, deep thinkers have been pushed to the fringes of society. Their insights don't just challenge ideas, they challenge egos. And human nature is built to protect the ego from discomfort at all costs. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever introduced a complex idea in a casual conversation, only to be met with awkward silence? Have you noticed how quickly people change the subject when discussions go beyond surface-level topics? This isn't random. It's a psychological defense mechanism. When people encounter a deep thinker, their minds go into self-preservation mode. Instead of engaging, they dismiss. Instead of being curious, they resist. This is why intellectuals, philosophers, and visionaries often find themselves isolated, not because they desire solitude, but because society gradually pushes them away. Interestingly, research shows that in social settings, confidence is often valued more than intelligence. People are naturally drawn to those who project certainty, even if their ideas are shallow. History is full of examples. Populist leaders, motivational speakers, and viral influencers who thrive by telling people what they want to hear rather than challenging them to think critically. Meanwhile, those who question widely accepted beliefs often struggle to find an audience. This is the paradox of intelligence. The more someone pursues truth, the more disconnected they become from the majority. The mirror effect doesn't just expose society's limitations, it reveals why society resists change in the first place. But the real question remains. If intelligence is so threatening, is there actual scientific proof that people fear it? Modern neuroscience confirms this. Studies show that when individuals feel intellectually inferior, their brain's amygdala, the region responsible for processing fear and threats, becomes highly active. In simple terms, deep thinking doesn't just intimidate people, it triggers a primal survival response, similar to the feeling of facing real danger. Why does intelligence trigger the same fear response as a physical threat? The answer lies in the way human brains evolved. For most of history, survival wasn't about being the smartest. It was about being accepted. Our ancestors thrived in tribes where social harmony meant protection. To be cast out was to be vulnerable, and vulnerability often meant death. This is why the human brain prioritizes social acceptance over intellectual brilliance. When an exceptionally intelligent person enters a social setting, they unknowingly disrupt this tribal balance. Their presence challenges long-held beliefs, established norms, and group dynamics. To the human brain, this isn't just an intellectual shift, it's a perceived threat, triggering the same defensive response as a physical danger. This is why deep thinkers often feel isolated, not because they lack social skills, but because their intelligence makes them stand out in a world that values conformity over distinction. A 2021 study at Stanford University revealed something even more startling. This rejection of deep thinkers is highly context-dependent. One-on-one interactions with intellectuals trigger little resistance, but in group settings, the threat response spikes dramatically. Why? Because in groups, social status takes center stage. People don't just react to intelligence itself, they react to how it affects their perceived standing. If someone feels outshined by a deep thinker, they instinctively seek to downplay, undermine, or exclude them as a way to protect their social rank. This is why deep thinkers often thrive in private discussions, but struggle in larger social environments. Psychologists have identified several cognitive biases that explain why intelligence is frequently met with resistance. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Those with limited knowledge often overestimate their competence, while highly intelligent individuals tend to doubt themselves. This creates friction, as those who know little believe they know more than they do, leading them to dismiss deep thinkers. Status quo bias. The human mind prefers familiarity over complexity. Intelligence often introduces disruptive ideas, which many find unsettling. The backfire effect. When confronted with information that challenges their beliefs, people don't reconsider. They double down. This makes deep thinkers frequent targets of resistance when introducing new perspectives. In the digital age, social media has amplified this rejection of intelligence. Algorithms prioritize engagement over depth, pushing emotionally charged, simplistic content over nuanced, intellectual discussions. Look at the most viral content. Short, catchy, and often misleading sound bites dominate, while well-reasoned arguments struggle for visibility. The more intellectual someone is, the harder it becomes to condense deep ideas into bite-sized, viral-friendly formats. As a result, society increasingly gravitates toward entertainment rather than enlightenment, making it even harder for deep thinkers to find broad acceptance. What does this mean for deep thinkers? The rejection of intelligence isn't just a social phenomenon. It's biological, psychological, and cultural. It's wired into human nature, reinforced by group dynamics, and magnified by modern technology. This doesn't mean deep thinkers should stop sharing their ideas, but it does mean they must recognize the forces working against them. But if intelligence is resisted, what is embraced instead? The answer is comfort, a world where predictability is preferred over truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of history's most brutally honest philosophers, saw intelligence not as a gift, but as a burden. Unlike thinkers who viewed intelligence as a path to success, Schopenhauer argued that the smarter a person is, the more they struggle to connect with society. But why? What makes intelligence such a curse? Schopenhauer's philosophy was centered on what he called the will, an irrational, blind force that drives all human behavior. Highly intelligent people, however, operate differently. Instead of blindly chasing pleasure, they develop a will to truth, an unrelenting desire to understand reality, even when it leads to discomfort. Most people seek happiness and avoid hard truths. Deep thinkers, on the other hand, seek truth, even if it leads to pain and isolation. This creates an unbridgeable gap between intellectuals and the rest of society. While the majority find meaning in relationships, entertainment, and routine pleasures, deep thinkers often see these as distractions from deeper existential questions. Schopenhauer believed that the deeper one understands human nature, the harder it becomes to connect with others. Those who see through deception and social facades find it difficult to engage in the usual small talk, status games, and polite dishonesty that define most interactions. Society thrives on simplicity, but deep thinkers crave depth. While the majority prefer light, surface-level conversations, Those who value truth over appearances often feel disconnected, unable to participate without a sense of boredom or alienation. They recognize the emptiness of human desires. Schopenhauer saw ambition and longing as illusions, mere distractions in a meaningless cycle. Most people chase wealth, power, and relationships, but deep thinkers often question the purpose of these pursuits. This skepticism makes them appear indifferent to what excites the majority, further deepening their sense of detachment. This is why highly intelligent individuals frequently feel misunderstood, resented, or isolated. Their very presence forces others to confront unsettling truths about themselves, truths most would rather avoid. Schopenhauer compared intelligence to an enhanced awareness, a so-called gift that often feels more like a curse. He famously wrote, "A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial." His reasoning was simple. The more you understand, the less you can ignore. The more you see the flaws of the world, the harder it becomes to find joy in it. The more deeply you think, the lonelier you become. For Schopenhauer, intelligence and happiness were inversely related. He believed ignorance, not wisdom, was the key to happiness. This is why history's greatest thinkers, Pascal, Kafka, struggled with depression, existential dread, and social isolation. But Schopenhauer didn't just diagnose the problem, he also proposed solutions. He believed that while intelligence often leads to loneliness, deep thinkers can navigate their isolation by 1. Embracing solitude. Rather than viewing solitude as a punishment, Schopenhauer saw it as a privilege. He believed intellectuals should use their alone time for creative and philosophical pursuits instead of seeking validation from society. 2. Finding like-minded individuals. Instead of conforming to the mainstream, he advised deep thinkers to seek out intellectual kin, whether through books, philosophy, or exclusive circles of thought. 3. Engaging with society wisely. He warned against sharing profound insights with those unprepared for them. Instead, he urged thinkers to observe the world, understand its patterns, and choose their words carefully. His teachings offer guidance for modern intellectuals struggling with social rejection. While intelligence may bring loneliness, it also grants freedom, clarity, and a deeper understanding of life itself. Schopenhauer viewed intelligence as a double-edged sword, both a source of power and an instrument of suffering. It enables one to perceive reality more clearly, but in doing so creates distance from those who prefer comforting illusions. In the end, Schopenhauer's philosophy confirms what many already suspect. Society does not fear intelligence itself. It fears what intelligence reveals. Deep thinkers aren't rejected because they are wrong. They are rejected because they are right too soon. So if you've ever felt alone in your thoughts, understand this. You are not broken. You simply see the world as it truly is. But does this mean deep thinkers are doomed to isolation? Or can they find a way to exist within society without losing their intellectual depth? The truth is, society isn't designed to embrace deep thinkers. It's designed for stability. Most people prioritize comfort over truth. That's why shallow conversations, simple ideas, and repetitive content dominate social spaces. But why is comfort favored over intellectual depth? Why does society resist change, even when it leads to progress? The answer lies in human psychology and the way institutions shape thought from an early age. 1. Cognitive ease. The brain prefers simple, familiar ideas because they require less mental energy. When confronted with complexity, the mind perceives it as difficult and even threatening. 2. System justification theory. People instinctively defend the status quo, even when it works against them. Instead of questioning authority or outdated beliefs, they rationalize them, because change is uncertain and unsettling. 3. Groupthink. Fear of social rejection keeps people aligned with widely accepted beliefs, even when those beliefs are flawed. This is why intellectual dissent is often dismissed, no matter how truthful it may be. Thought-provoking discussions struggle to gain traction because depth requires time, while viral content thrives on immediacy. Algorithms reward engagement, and nothing drives engagement more than controversy, outrage, or humor. Forces that often push intellectual discourse to the margins. Echo chambers form when people are only exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs, making them resistant to new ideas. In such an environment, deep thinkers who challenge mainstream narratives often find themselves ignored, misunderstood, or even attacked. But this rejection of deep thinking isn't just an online phenomenon. It starts in the very institutions that shape our thinking: schools, workplaces, and political systems. Schools claim to nurture intelligence, but in practice they reward obedience over independent thought. Students who memorize and repeat information are praised, while those who challenge authority are often dismissed as troublemakers. The corporate world does not prioritize intelligence or innovation. It prioritizes conformity. Employees who maintain the status quo are rewarded, while those who question established norms often find themselves sidelined. Leaders who base their arguments on logic and reason often lose to those who simply tell people what they want to hear. Popularity trumps truth. This is why history's greatest intellectuals were often seen as outcasts in their time. Their ideas were not celebrated, they were feared. Society claims to value intelligence, innovation, and critical thinking, but in reality, it only embraces these qualities when they are no longer a threat. Consider these examples. Galileo was imprisoned for his discoveries. Now he is hailed as a scientific pioneer. Van Gogh died in obscurity. Today, his paintings are worth millions. Nikola Tesla revolutionized energy, yet lived and died in poverty. Society does not celebrate intelligence when it disrupts the norm. It only honors it in hindsight, once the ideas are safe and widely accepted. So what can deep thinkers do? If you've ever felt misunderstood for thinking deeply, you're not alone. Throughout history, some of the greatest minds were ridiculed, persecuted, or ignored. Their ideas were seen as dangerous, disruptive, or simply too complex for their time. These thinkers had one thing in common: they were ahead of their era, and they suffered for it. The father of Western philosophy spent his life questioning commonly held beliefs. He encouraged people to think critically, challenge their own assumptions, and prioritize logic over blind tradition. But instead of being honored for his wisdom, he was put on trial for corrupting the youth and defying the gods. His real crime? Teaching people to think for themselves. Offered a chance to escape, Socrates refused. Instead, he chose to drink poison rather than abandon his principles. His final words remain legendary: "The unexamined life is not worth living." His death was a warning. Society fears those who question its deepest beliefs. Galileo's only crime was uncovering the truth. When he proved that the earth orbits the sun, he shattered centuries of religious doctrine. The church, which maintained power by controlling knowledge, branded him a heretic. Under threat of torture, he was forced to publicly renounce his own discoveries. Though today he is celebrated as one of history's greatest scientists, in his own time, he lived under house arrest, his work silenced for nearly a century. Galileo's story is proof that even the most undeniable truths will be rejected if they challenge the existing power structure. Nietzsche's philosophy was considered too radical, too unsettling. He argued that traditional morality was flawed, that society preferred comforting illusions over harsh realities. This deep psychological craving for simplicity over complexity is why intellectuals, philosophers, and scientists often struggle to gain mass acceptance, especially in their lifetimes. Look at today's digital world. Who dominates social media? Not the intellectuals, but those who can condense complex ideas into viral, feel-good sound bites. Nietzsche's ideas on power, will, and morality were too much for his time. He was dismissed as insane, his work ignored or misinterpreted. Yet today, his philosophy influences psychology, literature, and existential thought. His legacy proves that society often rejects deep thinkers in the present, only to embrace them in the future. Nikola Tesla was a visionary. He dreamed of free energy, wireless electricity, and technological advancements that could have redefined civilization. But those in power saw his ideas as a threat. Industrialists like Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan, who profited from selling electricity, ensured Tesla's vision never materialized. Despite his genius, Tesla died alone in a small hotel room, forgotten and broke, while others built fortunes on his stolen ideas. His story is a reminder that society often rewards businessmen and marketers over true visionaries. Alan Turing's code-breaking efforts helped end World War II. His work saved millions of lives and laid the foundation for modern computing and artificial intelligence. Yet instead of being honored, he was persecuted for his personal life. In 1952, he was chemically castrated for being gay, a cruel punishment that led to his tragic suicide at just 41. Today, he is recognized as a hero, but in his own time, society discarded him despite his extraordinary contributions. While history's deep thinkers were mostly men, Hypatia of Alexandria was a rare exception. A philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer, she challenged the male-dominated intellectual world of ancient Rome. She championed scientific reasoning and rational thought, an act that placed her in direct conflict with religious authorities. In 415 AD, a mob of religious extremists brutally murdered her, fearing the threat she posed to their power. Her story underscores a recurring pattern in history. Intellectual progress is often met with violent resistance. Each of these thinkers shared the same fate. Their ideas were too advanced for their time. They were rejected, ridiculed, or punished in life, only for their ideas to become the foundation of human progress. Society does not fear intelligence itself. It fears what intelligence represents: change. And that raises an important question. If history proves that society resists deep thinkers, what does that mean for you? Are deep thinkers doomed to loneliness? Number. But they must learn to navigate society wisely. Not every place or person is ready for deep conversations. Save your most profound thoughts for those who truly appreciate them. You don't need millions of people to understand you, just the right ones. Seek out like-minded thinkers in books, online communities, or intellectual circles. History's greatest minds found ways to make deep ideas accessible. Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." The challenge is not just to think deeply, but to communicate depth without overwhelming others. Schopenhauer wrote, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." Deep thinkers will always make some people uncomfortable, but that should never be a reason to stop thinking deeply. Society may resist them, but it is deep thinkers who drive humanity forward. So if you have ever felt like an outsider because of your thoughts, remember this: you are not alone. The world may not always embrace deep thinkers, but it has always needed them.